truth is the most convincing story that maps onto reality, and that's why the central narrative is falling apart.
Right now in the United States, people should not be walking around with masks.
We must see the central narrative for the fiction that it is. We are Americans.
While elections are sometimes messy, this was a secure election.
The founders began the fight for human liberty and self-governance, and it's up to us to finish the job.
I'll tell you what, we are in a truth emergency right now.
This is the end game.
It's Tuesday, October 8th, 2024, the 1357th day of dystopia. I'm your moderator, Chris Paul. Let's be reasonable. A warm welcome and hello to all of you listening through a paid subscription at imyourmoderator.substack.com. You can become a paid subscriber for as little as $50 a year or $5 a month. And in doing so, you'll get the ad-free experience. You'll be able to participate in the conversation over on Substack, and you'll be invited to the interactive live stream every Wednesday afternoon. And if you can't or you simply don't want to, continue listening to the free version on Substack, a wide variety of podcast platforms, and of course, Rumble. All I ask is that you share it with your friends. You can find the links to the podcast, the writing, the social media, and the merch site by visiting linktree.com/I'mYourModerator. Anyone who understands the roller coaster we've been on these past few years knows we haven't reached the end yet, and there may still be hard times to come. And as we add $1 trillion to the national debt every 100 days, we could be headed for some shaky financial times. If you're like me, you're figuring out how to diversify and make sure some seeds are planted for whatever may come. And that's one of the many reasons I think Bitcoin is part of our future. But it's not only about money. Bitcoin looks to be a critical part of the next generation of technology, communications, energy, verification, and even national defense. I'd encourage everyone to do their research and do it now. And if you're convinced of the likelihood that Bitcoin is an essential part of our future, then you'll need an on-ramp. I recommend River. River empowers you to grow your portfolio without any unwanted surprises and eliminates third-party custodians, putting you in control of your assets. Open an account with no minimum purchase requirement. You can get your Bitcoin journey started with just $1. Visit partner.river.com/reasonable to create your River account today. That's partner.river.com/reasonable. Now, I know that many of you out there understand the need to diversify assets, or maybe you're looking to protect your retirement savings, but you're not quite there yet on Bitcoin. And you feel better about precious metals? I get that too. I think going in multiple directions is wise, and I do that myself. And when it comes to buying precious metals, you want to be working with a good company. And that's why I've partnered with Goldco. Goldco is a 6-time Inc. 5000 winner, 2022 Company of the Year, and they've helped people like you and me place over $2 billion in gold and silver. And I have gotten silver from Goldco. And right now they're offering my supporters up to $10,000 in bonus silver while supplies last. Don't pass this offer up. Go to reasonablegold.com now. This is your opportunity to protect you and your family from an out-of-control government before it's too late. So don't wait a second longer. Take action today. Click on the link in the podcast notes or go to reasonablegold.com now and get your free gold kit, your free IRA kit. You'll be glad you did. All right, so yesterday we talked about Donald Trump's triumphant return to the scene of assassination event number 1 in Butler, Pennsylvania for a rally on Saturday evening, picking up where he left off on July 13th of this year. We talked about the appearance made by Elon Musk. We talked about the opera singer Christopher Nolan, who joined Trump on stage. After a moment of silence for Cory Compouture, and of course, Trump brought with him his running mate, J.D. Vance, and a number of other speakers, local politicians, family members, etc. Now, there was a strange scene at the very end of the rally that I didn't discuss yesterday, and I want to talk about today. I don't think too many people actually saw it, and it's honestly not very easy to find. But as Macchio was singing Hallelujah, whatever channel's broadcast I was watching cut from Macchio's performance down to a location to the side of the stage or maybe backstage where J.D. Vance was hosting an impromptu press conference with reporters. And he said a few interesting things that I'm trying to understand and trying to place in context. And so I'm going to play some of that in just a second. But before we get into that, I want to frame the conversation a little bit. Tonight on the show Badlands Story Hour that I co-host with my friend Burning Bright, we are discussing the movie Oppenheimer, directed by Christopher Nolan. It was released last summer on the same weekend as Barbie. And the two movies opening on the same night was made into its own cultural trend. They wanted to make sure everyone got the full dose of both psyops. You could not participate in American popular culture in any way and not know that those two movies were coming out and everyone was going to go see them. The Barbie movie starts out like 2001: A Space Odyssey, except it features a little girl with her baby dolls that she loves playing with and nurturing until she sees the tall, slim, sexy Barbie doll, and then she knows that's the woman I want to be, and proceeds to smash the heads of her little baby dolls in. After that, the movie takes place in a dystopian false reality, featuring a series of pretty incredible moral inversions, and the thing amounts to one long feminist promoting screed. It's very crass and lowbrow, but it features a diverse cast and lots of bright colors, lots of people you've seen before wearing lots of very special outfits. It was perfect for people to talk about on Instagram and TikTok, and for some reason, Hollywood thought that people would accept it as an award-worthy film. But it was essentially just a forgettable piece of pop culture propagandistic trash. Now, on the other hand, you have Christopher Nolan's Oppenheimer, which is very highbrow, very intellectual. It's going to be very pro-science and tell you how things really happened. The whole movie serves as a cover-up of the fact that Oppenheimer, the man we're told created the atomic bomb, was a lifelong communist, a philanderer, who had attempted to murder one of his professors. He was totally compromised, totally full of shit, and feeding our quote-unquote nuclear secrets to the global regime allies in Germany and Russia and, of course, elsewhere. It's international. Good twin, evil twin was the same then as it is now. And it's not hard to tell which side Oppenheimer served. But naturally, everything he did and everything he promoted was excused by virtue of the fact that he was actually a really, really stunningly brilliant scientist. He was a member of the priestly class, and though he was a traitor to the country, a godless communist who was born into Prussian wealth, he grew up in a New York loft, raised by a father whose art collection featured names like Picasso and Van Gogh. The Manhattan Project was essentially started at Bohemian Grove, of all places. A general named Leslie Groves brought Oppenheimer onto the project. And this is all historical. This is not stuff that was specifically featured in the movie. There's a line in the movie delivered by Matt Damon, who plays General Leslie Groves, where he mentions that he built the Pentagon. And that is a historical fact. He protected Oppenheimer despite the fact that he was a communist, and all of it was justified under the pretense that the Nazis were racing to get the bomb, and if they got it before we got it, Nazism would reign over the world forever. And somehow, just somehow, Oppenheimer's work ended up in the hands of the Nazis and the Soviets anyway. There's even a moment in the film where Albert Einstein himself advises Oppenheimer, well, you'd better tell the Nazis about it. That way, neither side can ever use it. And just like that, the doctrine of mutually assured destruction was born. So Oppenheimer was a troubled hero, a communist, but somehow still a patriot. And even if he wasn't, he was necessary because he was the most brilliant scientist ever, except he really wasn't. And the ultimate solution to everything was to have powerful international governing bodies that could maintain the peace, understanding this element now of mutually assured destruction. They basically had to blow up a ton of innocent people and lie about what happened in order to end all war forever. And here we are in 2024, thankful that they ended all war forever. It is a very complex piece of propaganda. Now, one of the strange things you'll notice about Oppenheimer, if you ever see it or see it again, is that in almost every moment of the entire movie, all of the dialogue is what's called exposition. It just describes what's going on. It helps to build your understanding of the story. And really complicated concepts require a pretty good deal of exposition, generally speaking, because most filmmakers, especially mainstream ones, want the audience to understand what they're dealing with all the way through. But this movie isn't a particularly complicated concept. There's a race between scientists at the behest of their respective militaries to see who can do science the best in order to destroy the world so that you might be able to save it. All of them are communists, which the movie paints as acceptable. The solution is global communism. And while the Nazis are used to explain all of the evil, both inside Robert Oppenheimer and around him in his life in the things he did, the real antagonists in the film are the people who don't support the science enough. So throughout this 3-hour film, all of the exposition is just laced with these little nuggets, these little tiny facts, and you can just pause the movie and go down a rabbit hole on each and every one of them. And I spent a good portion of Sunday afternoon and Sunday evening doing exactly that. There's a moment in the film where Groves and Oppenheimer are worried about public perception, and they talk about how they can just reach out to Henry Luce. And if you're just watching the movie for entertainment, you think, wonder who Henry Luce is, and then move on. But if you look up who Henry Luce is, you will find that Henry Luce, who was the publisher of the magazines Time, Life, Fortune, and Sports Illustrated. He was the publisher of Time magazine when Time magazine was featuring Adolf Hitler on the cover as the Man of the Year. And I'm not suggesting that Hitler was portrayed in some especially positive light, but that Time magazine cover is a famous historical occurrence, and it just so happened to be Henry Luce who was the publisher when that happened. The Wikipedia page on Henry Luce notes, in January 1919, Luce and Haddon returned to Yale University as juniors. In May 1919, they were both tapped into the prestigious Skull and Bones Secret Society. Luce tried but failed to win a Rhodes Scholarship to the University of Oxford, but he was admitted to the university and paid his way. He spent the year traveling Europe, observing the post-World War I scene closely. He returned to the United States to take a job in Chicago as a junior reporter. Later in the Wikipedia entry, Luce, who remained editor-in-chief of all his publications until 1964, maintained a position as an influential member of the Republican Party. An instrumental figure behind the so-called China lobby, he played a large role in steering American foreign policy and popular sentiment in favor of Kuomintang leader Chiang Kai-shek and his wife Sung Mei-ling in their war against the Japanese. The Chiangs appeared in the cover of Time 11 times between 1927 and 1955. Now, the mainstream history says that the Kuomintang was initially a communist party, but then Chiang Kai-shek moved in and the party became conservative and then actually fought against the Chinese Communist Party. And it was that conservative movement that Henry Luce was involved with. And I thought, well, that's really weird because Henry Luce is described as a conservative, but he seems like he's just involved with the globalist project, which, of course, at the time is just the Zionist project, and it's kind of still that way now. So I asked Perplexity AI, what is Chiang Kai-shek's relationship to Zionism? It said Chiang Kai-shek and the Kuomintang had a generally positive relationship with Zionism, though it was primarily motivated by pragmatic concerns rather than an ideological alignment. It said that Chiang Kai-shek's predecessor, Sun Yat-sen, in 1920 called Zionism one of the greatest movements of the present time. Chiang Kai-shek maintained warm relations with local and international Jewish communities. And of course, it was the international Jewish communities using finance and propaganda media to leverage the transfer agreement between the Zionists and the Nazis to have the Nazis transport European Jews down to Palestine to settle the global regime proxy state called Israel. And if that sounds like a conspiracy theory to you, I would advise you to read Edwin Black, a Jewish Zionist. His book is called The Transfer Agreement. It's been published in 3 editions now, originally published in 1984. It was widely read and highly praised, and it goes into explicit detail about what I just described. The Zionist project is not only about building the state of Israel, it's also about governing the world. In 1939, the son of Sun Yat-sen, Sun K, proposed a plan to settle European Jewish refugees in southwest China. This was partly motivated by the belief that it would help gain support from influential Jewish figures in the United States and Britain against Japan. And it's interesting because one of the linked articles, in fact, the one that describes that aspect, is from the magazine Foreign Policy, a mouthpiece of the global regime. The headline, "What if Israel had been in China?" What? What if Israel had been in China? I thought Israel was that historic location on the map. I thought Israel was the Holy Land. I mean, that's what we were raised to believe, were we not? The Kuomintang government considered multiple plans to settle European Jewish refugees in China during World War II. These plans were seen as potential tools to win international support in their war against Japan. Oh, so they needed the Zionists, just like the Nazis. And the explanation is it was purely pragmatic, just like the Nazis. The KMT's approach to Zionism and Jewish refugees was largely pragmatic. They believed that offering refuge to persecuted Jews might influence Western governments, particularly the U.S. and Britain, to support China against Japan. Luce was a key figure in the United States of steering American sentiment and American foreign policy in that direction. What was once obvious support of the Zionist project is now just called conservatism. And of course, that makes sense because conservatism has largely become identified with neoconservatism, which is just an ideological outgrowth of Trotsky. It's the same regime operating in different places, setting up the controlled opposition dynamic to enact the same agenda. And the movie describes Luce as an ally of Oppenheimer and Groves. So I thought, oh, that's interesting. That makes sense. When Luce died, most of his fortune went to the Henry Luce Foundation. And if you go on influencewatch.org and look up the Henry Luce Foundation, you will see that in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, the foundation established a partnership with the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation and the Ford Foundation. So 2 global philanthropies that fund the globalist agenda. You can continue on. In August 2023, the foundation provided $100,000 to support queer trans religion in launching a peer-reviewed scholarly journal. Queer Trans Religion, that's the name of the organization. The journal is designed to provide both readers and authors with access to academic research that explores the intersections of religion, gender, and sexuality. So it sounds like not only was Henry Luce deeply committed to the global regime's project, the foundation that outlived him is also very involved in the global regime's project, even 60 years later. Luce's father preceded him at Yale and also just happens to have a chapel named after him on the campus of Tunghai University in Taichung, Taiwan. Luce married a woman named Clare Booth. who seems to have some familial relation to John Wilkes Booth. When Henry married Clare, Clare had an 11-year-old daughter named Anne Clare Brokaw, fathered by a man named George Tuttle Brokaw, who happened to be a wealthy heir of a clothing fortune and an ancestor of the newsman Peter Brokaw. Clare's daughter Anne was killed in a car accident, sadly, at the age of 20. Years later, Clare divorced George and eventually married Henry Luce. Her Wikipedia entry says it has been reported that their marriage was sexually open. Clare Luce's lovers included Ambassador Joseph P. Kennedy, the father of JFK, Randolph Churchill, General Lucian Truscott, General Charles Willoughby, and Roald Dahl, the children's author. It says the very tall and athletic Dahl later claimed he found his affair with Clare to be so physically demanding that he had begged the British ambassador to relieve him of the task, but the ambassador told him he must continue. I have no idea what that could possibly mean. In the early 1960s, both Luces were friends of philosopher, author, and LSD advocate Gerald Heard. They tried LSD one time under his careful supervision. Although taking LSD never turned into a habit for either of the Luces, a friend and biographer of Clare, Wilfred Sheed, wrote that Clare made use of it at least several times. Clare went on to be an author. She served in the United States House of Representatives as a Republican. She was present at the liberation of several Nazi concentration camps in April 1945, and she was staunchly anti-communist. But I went ahead and asked what Clare Luce's views were on Zionism, and Perplexity again returned a wide variety of quote-unquote reputable sources. And it says Clare Boothe Luce's stance on Zionism evolved over time and was somewhat complex. Initially, Clare Boothe Luce had little interest in Jewish affairs or Palestine before entering politics. However, her views on the subject began to develop after she became a member of Congress. After she became more involved in politics, Luce came to advocate for a Jewish homeland. Importantly, she also supported the idea that Palestinian Arabs should have their own homeland alongside the Jews. This suggests that she favored a two-state solution rather than exclusive Jewish control over the region. Despite her support for a Jewish homeland, Luce had some reservations about Zionism. She received correspondence expressing concerns that Zionism and Bolshevism were similar and posed threats to Christianity. And of course, they are similar. They're the exact same regime. They are different iterations of that same regime ideology in different places, using different tactics at different times. We are just supposed to forever ignore that neoconservatism is a euphemism. Again, it is an outgrowth of Trotsky. That's Bolshevism. Zionism is where those things connect. And it's the point at which the Luces and American militant globalism and Oppenheimer and Leslie Groves all connect. She threw her support behind the campaign of Dwight Eisenhower, and he rewarded her with an ambassadorship to Italy, where she worked on influencing the Mediterranean policies of one John Foster Dulles, who Wikipedia describes as another anti-communist. Ah, yes, if there's one thing the Dulleses are known for. And it's funny reading so much of this history, because all you have to do is understand that they have messed with some of these labels just a little bit, and the whole cover story as conservative patriotic Americans just immediately falls apart. The article says that Clare Boothe was revered in her later years as a hero of the feminist movement. At an event in Luxembourg attended by European dignitaries, Luce was heard declaiming that all women wanted from men was babies and security. Yet her own professional career as a successful editor, writer, playwright, reporter, legislator, and diplomat remarkably showed how a woman of humble origins and no college education could raise herself to an escalating series of public heights. Well, yes, she married a millionaire heir and then a media magnate, and then slept with Joseph P. Kennedy, Winston Churchill's son, a couple of generals, and Roald Dahl. It is absolutely possible for a woman with no education to become extraordinarily successful by doing that. Not that I would recommend it, especially as a good Catholic, as Clare Luce was. Aside from the part where she had all that sex with these prominent figures while she was married and the LSD thing and, the feminist thing. But I guess she was really, really awesome because Ronald Reagan gave her the Presidential Medal of Freedom back in 1983 for her life's work and her presence on the President's Foreign Intelligence Advisory Board. And then all the way down there at the bottom, we bring it back around to pure American conservatism. The Clare Luce Award, established in 1991, is the Heritage Foundation's highest award for distinguished contributions to the conservative movement. So what kind of conservative is the Heritage Foundation anyway? I mean, they have Project 2025. We're told that's the scariest conservative agenda ever. And of course, because the TV thinks we're retarded, we're all supposed to like that a lot. Oh, we're going to scare them so much. Isn't it great? And there might be some fine policies in Project 2025. I am not trying to condemn everything in the report, but it's clearly not written for Donald Trump. It's not written for a Donald Trump administration. It's written for whoever they thought they could get to replace Donald Trump. It is not Donald Trump's agenda. And I think the best way to prove that, to make that clear, is to understand that there are elaborate plans for executive branch agencies that Donald Trump plans to eliminate entirely. It is essentially a plan for how things should be done if under a Trump presidency, the conservative establishment is able to replace the full administrative state with their own version of the administrative state. Get rid of the Democrat establishment embedded in the administrative state and replace them with people friendly to the Republican establishment. We're going to switch from Coke to Pepsi, from the uniparty left to the uniparty right. And once that switch is made, all the world's problems will be blamed on quote-unquote conservatism, and we'll be told the country wanted to shift back in the other direction. That narrative agenda could be accomplished in 2 years if this was 2018. And there are little lines, little facts, little names, organizations sprinkled all throughout that 3-hour-long movie embedded in the exposition. And here's the thing. If it was in the movie, there's a reason it was in the movie. We understand what movies are. They're not real. They're scripted and then performed. There's nothing natural or organic or spontaneous about the events in the film or how they're portrayed. All of that was planned and then executed in a variety of ways. The best of those ways was then selected and then edited and then pieced together with a bunch of other clips like it that went through that same process. And then eventually we have the thing that all of us see, especially in a movie of that magnitude. Every detail is poured over. The elements of the film are in the film because someone, or more likely many people, wanted them in the film. Now, the director is the person who is ultimately responsible for all of these choices. And with someone like Christopher Nolan, he probably has a lot of control. But at the end of the day, the final decision is made at the studio level. Not always, but generally speaking. Regardless, the point remains, if it's in the script, if it's in the film, there's a reason for it. And so let's bring that back around to the rally in Butler, Pennsylvania on Saturday night, and something that struck me as strange at the time and strikes me as even stranger now. So to reset, the rally ends. Trump gives a rousing speech. The crowd has had a wonderful time. They got to see Elon Musk jump up and down with joy. And the opera singer Christopher Nolan comes back to sing Nessun Dorma. And then he moves into Hallelujah, a song that's been recorded many times by many artists. I think it's most famously recorded by Jeff Buckley, but it was written by Leonard Cohen. During that song, whatever stream it was, I was watching, and I think it might have been the DJT channel on Rumble, Donald Trump's official channel, though it may have been RSBN. They cut away to the side stage where J.D. Vance was taking questions from reporters. The reporters were off camera. There was one camera focused on J.D. Vance, and he just started fielding questions. The entire segment was around 12 minutes long. He touched on a range of subjects: abortion, the election, immigration, etc. But here's the first exchange of this little impromptu press conference.
Coming here today to Butler to return of where President Trump
had the attempted assassination. What was going on in your mind when you first walked in? Yeah, so I wasn't here the first rally where the president was shot. There was actually some talk of coming because that Saturday morning I met with the president in Mar-a-Lago about potentially becoming his running mate. It was the first time I'd ever talked to him about it, in fact. And then, he flew up here. I went back home to Ohio. I talked to him right before he went on stage. And then, of course, 30 minutes later, we start hearing the news. So to me, frankly, surreal to connect this moment to what could have been an extraordinarily tragic day for the entire country. And I was going to finish answering the question if I could, but just really, really profoundly moving to be here because, look, I mean, you talk to his family, his sisters talk about being, part of a unit where they feel like they're missing something core in their family. You talk to his daughters, they're incredibly sad. Obviously, it was just 8 weeks ago. So I think it's just a very, very emotional moment for me to see it, to connect it to the real people who have been affected by it. But then, of course, to have, how many tens of thousands of people here driving home this message that we've got to win Pennsylvania. And I think we're going to do exactly that.
So where were you that day? How did you find out about the president being shot?
Well, I was with the president of Mar-a-Lago that Saturday morning. I flew back home to Ohio. I was actually taking my kids mini golfing, and that's where we were. I actually had a mini golf stick in my hand, a putter, and somebody texted me and said, the president's been shot. I sort of started hearing from a lot of friends. And of course, at the beginning, I feared the worst because you see the video, he goes down, you think maybe that's the end of his life. Thank God he was okay, but unfortunately, Corey wasn't, right? So you take the good with the bad, you take the bitter with the sweet. I think a lot of people were very excited, but we're also certainly in a period of mourning for this. I mean, look, this is a member of the president's movement. This is a guy who wanted to come to this event, who was very excited to be here, who actually told his family that he thought he might get called on stage. And you realize that when that assassin's bullet rang out, it really did attack the most fundamental right of Americans, which is the right to vote and the right to participate in their political process. Corey was taken from us permanently, and I think one of the ways that we're trying to remember him is just to run this campaign, run it well, and take our message out to the voters of Pennsylvania and everywhere else.
Now, there were certainly some interesting things said there, not the least of which was that Corey Compertor told his family that he thought he might get called up on stage. Now, I haven't heard that before. There are people who have followed Trump assassination event number 1 in far more granular ways than I have, but I haven't heard that. I haven't seen Trump at any point imply prior knowledge of Corey Compertor, that he knew him before that event. So that struck me as odd. But what I thought was the strangest was J.D. Vance's claim that the first time Donald Trump ever talked to him about potentially performing the role of running mate in this fake campaign leading up to this fake election was at Mar-a-Lago on January 13th. J.D. said he had considered going to that first Butler rally, but instead he flew back to Ohio and was playing putt-putt with his kids when the news came out that someone had started shooting at the Trump rally. And of course, that someone is definitely Thomas Matthew Crooks, that weird little guy that seems totally made up, whose parents don't seem to know him at all, that 20-year-old with absolutely zero internet presence. Nearly 3 months have passed, and there are very few answers about much of anything that happened that day. Now, if you were listening back then, you'll remember that I highlighted an article from Puck News and their writer Dylan Byers, the Thiel-Hoffman face-off in Sun Valley. And the article goes on to describe a billionaire confab in Sun Valley, Idaho, where during one of the conference events, there was a loud and angry exchange between global communist oligarch Reid Hoffman, the founder of LinkedIn, and one of the members of what is commonly referred to as the PayPal Mafia, a group whose members went on to found major companies like YouTube, Yelp, SpaceX, and whose members include not only Elon Musk, but Peter Thiel, J.D. Vance's mentor. Here's how the article describes what went down. In an interview in March 2023, Hoffman told Kara Swisher, "Peter and I talk a lot less now than we used to. I mean, a lot less. Partially because if we're going to talk, we're going to argue about this. It's probably been challenging for both of us." And he's talking about the Trump thing. Peter Thiel has been mildly pro-Trump some of the time. As their exchange at the conference made clear, it has indeed been quite challenging. On Wednesday morning, more than half a dozen conference attendees told me Hoffman was on stage with Palantir CEO Alex Karp in conversation with moderator Andrew Ross Sorkin. Peter Thiel, of course, was a co-founder of Palantir. At one point, Sorkin asked Hoffman to talk about his relationship with Thiel. Reed offered some kind words for his former friend, but said he doesn't speak to him anymore because of his support for Trump, which Hoffman called a moral issue. Thiel, who was sitting in the audience, along with all the other conference attendees, appeared to be visibly miffed over this accusation of moral delinquency. He ultimately stood up for himself and offered his own retort. As multiple attendees told me, Thiel told Hoffman that his door was always open if he ever wanted to talk. He also sarcastically thanked him for having sent him a deck of his trumped-up cards, the satirical anti-Trump Cards Against Humanity style deck Hoffman created in 2016. "I sent you the first deck, Peter," Hoffman replied. For a moment, some attendees said, it seemed as if the exchange between the former friends might end amicably. Then Thiel got serious. In 2016, the cards had been funny, he said, but a few months later, after Trump won the White House, they looked silly. Thiel donated $1.25 million to Trump in that campaign. Thiel then intimated that Hoffman's obsession with small-minded tactics was misguided, hadn't worked in 2016, and wouldn't work now, and moreover, that all of Hoffman's efforts to combat Trump only made him stronger. He was aggressively and condescendingly glib, one attendee said. He seemed to be saying, it doesn't matter what you do, bring it on. Then in what one source described as the dagger and another as twist of the knife, Thiel sarcastically thanked Hoffman for funding lawsuits against Trump, like the E. Jean Carroll lawsuit, for instance, because they had turned him into, quote, a martyr, thereby increasing his chances of re-election. "I am so grateful to you," Thiel said. From the stage, Hoffman shot back with his own sarcastic quip. "Yeah, I wish I made him an actual martyr." And on that very uncomfortable note, the exchange ended. Both Hoffman and Thiel did not respond to emails requesting comment. So we have an exclusive bunch of billionaires and presumably some journalists, but buyers got this story secondhand. I don't think the story has been disputed in any way. So it seems like the billionaires at this private billionaire event were probably just fine with this story getting out there. Regardless, this story is now part of the script. The story was published on July 12th, the day before assassination event number 1, the day before J.D. Vance was down at Mar-a-Lago meeting with Donald Trump and discussing for the first time the possibility that Donald Trump might select him as the quote-unquote running mate in this fake campaign in this fake election. So Wednesday, July 10th, Thiel and Hoffman have this uncomfortable exchange in public, right in the middle of the conference, disrupting the event. On Friday, this article comes out in Puck News. Saturday morning, J.D. Vance is down with Donald Trump at Mar-a-Lago, and they discuss J.D. Vance being the running mate for the first time. That afternoon, J.D. Vance flies back to Ohio, where he plays putt-putt with his kids, and Donald Trump attends the rally in Butler, and we all know what happened after that. Or more accurately, we have no idea what happened after that, but we've pieced together a few things that we saw on TV with a few things that we were told by former Fox News hosts who portray themselves as experts on this subject, despite the fact that 3 months later, we still have no conclusive answers about anything. 2 days after that, on Monday, the 15th, Donald Trump announced that J.D. Vance would be the running mate in a post on Truth Social. No real fanfare, just a simple announcement. Strangely, on the same day, a video was released that featured Robert F. Kennedy Jr. talking to Donald Trump on speakerphone, so you can hear both ends of the conversation, and Trump discusses teaming up with Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Now, it's possible they were just talking about an endorsement and some role in the administration for RFK Jr. to pursue his Make America Healthy Again agenda, or to pursue his lifelong battle against the deep state in a quest for the truth to be publicized about the assassinations of his father, Robert F. Kennedy, and his uncle, John F. Kennedy. All of that is possible, but there have also been rumors of Donald Trump selecting Robert F. Kennedy Jr. as his next vice president that go all the way back to January of this year. But in truth, they go back even further than that because I mentioned it as a possibility in early 2023, and I highlighted this a couple of months ago. I don't point that out to suggest I'm the amazing Kreskin. I point that out because it's been clear that the narrative has been suggesting that possibility for quite a while. And so let's recap and provide some context. On Wednesday the 10th, Hoffman and Thiel, J.D. Vance's mentor, are having a loud argument disrupting a billionaire conference where they go back and forth about Donald Trump becoming an actual martyr. 2 days later, this conversation was reported in Puck News. The next morning, J.D. Vance is at Mar-a-Lago talking for the first time with Trump about becoming the vice president. He goes off to Iowa with his kids. Trump goes to the rally in Butler. And then on Monday, the video of the call between RFK Jr. and Trump is released. They talk about teaming up in the video. And not too long after, Donald Trump posts on Truth Social that it's going to be J.D. Vance. What is our takeaway from the billionaire confab? Well, Reid Hoffman has always been a Trump hater. Peter Thiel has been a supporter of Donald Trump, sometimes more supportive than others. The article clearly paints Reid Hoffman as anti-Trump, Peter Thiel as pro-Trump. But they're talking about him becoming a martyr, and just 3 days later, Thiel's mentee, a man Thiel is kind of credited with putting in office, J.D. Vance, a guy who was kind of built to be the next Dan Crenshaw or Adam Kinzinger. Thiel had attempted essentially the same thing in Arizona with Blake Masters. That one didn't work. But just 3 days later, his guy is at Mar-a-Lago, eventually to be named the running mate, and that afternoon, assassination event number 1. That is quite a turn of events. And let's spend just one more second on J.D. Vance's impromptu press conference after the Trump rally. Now, I'm going to keep trying to figure out what broadcast I must have been viewing when I saw this, but that's a little difficult because it was playing live, and it's possible that segment has simply been edited out of whatever broadcast I watched live. A number of the broadcasts I went through end once Trump's speech ends, and they don't show that entire segment afterward. Now, if there's one thing we know about Donald Trump, it's that he's a showman. He is meticulous about the details. People often point to that famous video of Trump getting ready to film some piece of content, make some sort of statement, and Trump is focused on exactly how the table and the glass on that table will look in the frame next to him. He's focused on those sorts of details. He's focused on the experience, and he's focused on the presentation. Trump is famously a major fan of music and loves to curate an experience at Mar-a-Lago by selecting the songs that are playing on his iPad at the table. So Trump's speech ends, and he brings out this magnificent opera singer, Christopher Nolan. And I suggest everyone go ahead and download his EP that he released in 2011. It has Nessun Dorma, and it has that beautiful version of Hallelujah. It's quite lovely. I suspect that Donald Trump brought that opera singer out to show, and the millions and millions of people watching that rally at home, that this is part of what Make America Great Again means. We're not only returning to more traditional values when it comes to social issues, we're attempting at least to return to a more enhanced and sophisticated culture instead of this awful corporate slop we're fed nonstop that we are supposed to accept as the thing that everybody just wants. And so I found it especially strange that a broadcast would cut away to J.D. Vance taking questions after Donald Trump had just given that rousing speech nearly 2 hours long. The moment of silence for Corey Compatore, the crowd spontaneously breaking into the national anthem, cheers of God bless Trump, Elon Musk jumping for joy, Trump giving a great speech. And now this beautiful opera music at the end, and there's a cutaway to J.D. Vance standing in front of a metal shed in the dark, giving an impromptu press conference where he details where he was and what he was doing on the day of assassination event number 1, and says that Corey Compatore had told his wife that he thought he was going to be called up on stage at the Trump rally. That is very strange. It's very weird that Donald Trump, the showman, with meticulous attention to detail, would bring a fabulous opera singer up onto stage, a singer so good with such a presence that Donald Trump stayed on stage with him, watching, and scheduled an impromptu press conference for J.D. Vance at the exact same time. Now, maybe J.D. Vance was just doing media off to the side of the stage, and whatever network, whatever platform I was watching, decided to cut to J.D. Vance. It's entirely possible. I don't know how satisfying an answer that is, but it's possible. It's also possible that Donald Trump wanted exactly that because J.D. Vance was sent out there to deliver certain comms, or maybe to make the Trump case in different language than Donald Trump used and appeal to a slightly different audience because there were so many people in the national audience, online, on television, at home, watching this event. There were reports that it was over 12 million at one time. Perhaps Trump thought those people would have missed J.D. Vance speaking earlier in the day, and it would be good to get J.D. out there on camera so all those people at home could hear J.D. Vance make his pitch as well. It's totally plausible, but it's not very satisfying. Why would Donald Trump want his running mate to upstage the opera singer he brought on and end up delivering the final word on behalf of the campaign for those people watching at home? Donald Trump doesn't need someone else speaking for him at his event while his event is going, while he is featuring a phenomenal performer who can be heard in the background as J.D. Vance is speaking. And apparently, asking these questions in this order, connecting these different events just because they feature the same people along the same timeline, is cause for great triggering. What are you trying to do? Divide the movement? Are you trying to lose this fake election by noticing that these certain things happened at the same time and involved the same people and seem, hey, awfully strange? If I was talking about Kamala Harris and Tim Walz, if I was talking about Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, no one would be upset. But just putting these facts together had people online screaming, "Why are you attacking J.D. Vance?" I didn't attack J.D. Vance. J.D. Vance might be the wonderful man everyone immediately assumed he was for no reason whatsoever, because he's well-spoken, because he has nice eyes, because he used to be in the military. Well, that's like Adam Kinzinger and Dan Crenshaw. I mean, Dan Crenshaw only has one eye, but those guys meet those qualifications. J.D. Vance wrote a book about his hard upbringing, except if you actually read the book or listen to J.D. Vance read the book, as I did, it actually becomes kind of hard to see that book as authentic. It's not a very good book, but it was made into a Hollywood movie. Again, it seems to me like J.D. Vance was specifically groomed to fill a role like this in just about every way you could possibly imagine. Now, I'm not saying J.D. Vance is a good guy, and I'm not trying to cast aspersions toward J.D. Vance, but we don't have to grovel before J.D. Vance. If Trump had selected someone else and not him, no one would care. But since Trump did select him, all of us are supposed to fall in line, even though Donald Trump has selected a number of people just to specifically spotlight them. So the country, so the people, through vetting that person, can reveal other important truths. Except the problem is, most of the people who would be inclined to do that no longer do it because they're worried that if they do it, they're going to hurt Donald Trump's chances of winning a fake election. Donald Trump already won in 2020 by a lot. He did not concede. There are still open court cases. Why are people more concerned with protecting J.D. Vance than they are with the fact that our elections are fake? It's an awfully weird urge to suggest we should no longer be seeking to find out what the truth is and then tell everybody because there's an election on the way and we need to seize power by winning a fake election. We should stop saying what it is we notice. We should stop thinking about things. We should stop telling the truth because we need to seize power really badly. And when you get to that point, it should be easy to notice that's what the other side does. And in fact, it's through doing things like that, lying so you can seize power in a corrupted and illegitimate system, that puts you on the other side. Laying out a series of facts that makes you uncomfortable does not put me on the other side. I don't know if J.D. Vance is a bad guy or the best guy. He could be either. I'm totally open to both. But I'm not going to assume that he is our new anointed leader for 2028 and that I have to grovel before him and praise him at every opportunity just because Donald Trump selected him as a running mate in a fake campaign leading up to a fake election. Following an election he never conceded, one that we know Joe Biden didn't receive 81 million real lawful American votes, and for whatever reason, people have just ignored. I don't know if he's a good guy or a bad guy, but I know that that scene was in the script for a reason. Either Donald Trump wanted those comms out there and he wanted people to hear from J.D. Vance at that moment delivering that messaging, or whatever news outlet broadcast and set up that press conference wanted to have J.D. Vance out there getting the last word and seeming very authoritative. All of the Con Inc. op, the old DeSantis simps, all the people who went along with COVID and masks and lockdowns and vaccines, the people who ignored the stolen election, the people who supported the war in Ukraine and the war in Israel and all of it, they can't get enough J.D. Vance. They certainly want J.D. Vance to be anointed. They loved him in his debate performance, a debate performance in which he failed to reject Project 2025 and say that Trump's campaign has no association with that, a debate in which he ducked directly answering questions about whether or not the 2020 election was stolen. A couple of days later, they filmed a scene where a reporter asked him, did Trump win? And he said, yep, he won. So bold. I don't know what's in J.D. Vance's heart. Could be kayfabe. J.D. Vance could be a wonderful guy, maybe even the best guy. Again, it's plausible. This is not about J.D. Vance. Maybe it's all just kayfabe, just like Ron DeSantis was and Nikki Haley was. In that impromptu press conference, by the way, J.D. Vance noted Tulsi Gabbard and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and Nikki Haley and Brian Kemp, all as these powerful Trump allies who were really going to get out there and support Donald Trump so that we could save America. Well, that's quite a strange collection of characters. Now, I'm not privy to what these people know behind the scenes or what this strategy is, but what I can observe is all of the worst people on television love J.D. Vance, and they want to anoint J.D. Vance for 2028, which is a weird thing to do during a period where we're told Donald Trump is the target of unrelenting assassination attempts. It's a strange thing to be doing during a fake election, where if Donald Trump is declared the winner, there will be attempt after attempt to delegitimize that win, maybe leading up to a disqualification of Donald Trump under the 14th Amendment by whatever House of Representatives is quote unquote elected if we do indeed go through with this farce and have a quote unquote election on November 5th. What would happen if Donald Trump wins and is then disqualified? Do Republicans agree to compromise so long as J.D. Vance can become the new president? Now, I obviously don't know that that's where we're headed. Maybe it's even a low probability possibility, but you have to admit it's some kind of possibility. We can be supportive of Donald Trump and J.D. Vance and the overall project without turning our brains off and becoming normies once again, just because it's nice to finally have the TV agree with us and all of those establishment conservatives we know, the Heritage Foundation type of conservatives, wanting to be friends with us again and supporting Donald Trump for now, for at least the next 4 weeks from today. And after that, who knows? Think about it. Ask yourself, do some of these TV characters who are out there with Tucker Carlson, the people on The Blaze, the people at the Daily Wire, the people on Fox News, all the people who called Joe Biden president, is there any chance that after November 5th, they might go anti-Trump but pro-Vance and might be more than happy to help their partners on the uniparty left get rid of Donald Trump and replace him with someone more controllable? That's the strategy they've pursued for 4 years now. In fact, it's the strategy they've pursued for 9 years now. Remember throughout the primaries in 2015 and 2016, how they were doing everything they could to keep Donald Trump off the ticket. Now, maybe that was all kayfabe. Maybe all of this is a show. But if all of it is a show, then you have to understand that there must be a reason all of this is in the script. And so to assert that we shouldn't spend time trying to figure this out and actually analyze it in an objective fashion, the way we would anything else, is to surrender with a huge lead As the final seconds tick off the clock, if J.D. Vance is a good guy, whose heart is in the right place, who's going to become a warrior for the America First movement, then he will certainly prove that to us. He'll prove it to me as well. I would love for that to be the case. But I don't just assume it's true because Donald Trump selected him as running mate in a fake campaign for a fake election, that he's well-spoken while delivering the conservative establishment line on every single issue in a way that seems appealing enough to MAGA. We are in a zero-trust environment. That scene, that impromptu press conference, while Trump was on stage watching the opera singer perform, is in the script for a reason. If Donald Trump and the Trump team put it there, wonderful. They wanted the country to see J.D. Vance too, understanding that people probably hadn't seen his speech that was a few hours prior. It would be like a big band bringing out one of the members from the opening act during their big encore so that he could play keys or an extra guitar. And in that case, wonderful. He delivers the comms. He shows the country the nice young face of MAGA. But otherwise, that looks like the same con inc op that's been running this entire time. Regardless, it's in the script for a reason. And there are a couple of other strange stories floating around out there today. This is CNN this morning. Deloitte feels the wrath of Trump world over employees' leaked J.D. Vance messages. Trump allies are calling for the federal government to punish Deloitte after an employee at the consulting firm apparently shared his private messages with J.D. Vance. The attacks on Deloitte are just the latest example of major American companies getting targeted by former President Donald Trump or those in his orbit. So the employee releases text messages from a private conversation with J.D. Vance, and the problem is that Trump and Trump world are reacting negatively to that. That means Deloitte is being targeted. Deloitte started to feel the wrath of Trump world immediately after the Washington Post published an explosive story on September 27th that revealed Vance said in a private 2020 message that Trump, quote, thoroughly failed to deliver, end quote, his economic agenda. The Post did not reveal who corresponded with Vance, now Trump's running mate, and leaked those communications. The article gives some reaction from Donald Trump Jr., who said on X, formerly Twitter, maybe it's time for the GOP to end Deloitte's taxpayer-funded gravy train, noting that Deloitte receives billions of dollars in government contracts. Deloitte received about $3 billion from the U.S. federal government in fiscal 2024, according to federal data. That includes 9-figure amounts from major agencies such as the Department of Defense, the IRS, and the Department of Homeland Security. 2 days later, Trump Jr. followed up in another tweet that asked if Deloitte had commented yet on an employee, quote unquote, conspiring with the Post to help Kamala Harris. We are not forgetting this, Trump Jr. said in a post. Neither Trump nor Vance have publicly threatened Deloitte. And it's worth noting that Trump Jr. has indicated he does not plan to serve in the federal government. Representatives for Vance and the Trump campaign did not respond to requests for comment. Still, the attacks on Deloitte fit a broader pattern of U.S. businesses getting singled out by Trump and his allies and underscore the risk that the former president could weaponize the federal government if he's returned to the White House in January. And of course, that stuff's just silly. Down toward the end, Norm Eisen, the author of the Color Revolution Playbook, the author of all the white papers on which the Trump indictments and lawsuits are based, the author of the white papers on which the January 6th sham committee report is based, a CNN analyst and fellow in government studies at the Brookings Institution, said, it's hard to understand how a company legally can or morally should be the subject of threatened retaliation for an employee's personal activities. Okay. But Trump and his allies have telegraphed their intent to weaponize the DOJ and the government to go after their perceived enemies. And we must take seriously the prospect that businesses will face retaliation. So a private conversation with J.D. Vance from 2020 is leaked out, and the way it is framed and portrayed by the Washington Post make it look like J.D. Vance was saying bad things about Donald Trump 4 years ago. Not a big deal, maybe a takedown effort by the Washington Post That would certainly be no surprise at all. But the story is now shifted to MAGA World attacking Deloitte, the major accounting firm. I got to tell you, I don't think that's happening. I don't spend a lot of time with the mainstream narratives these days, but I hadn't heard anything about this story, and I pay pretty close attention to what the broader truth community and MAGA community online are talking about. I didn't see this anywhere. This is a mainstream media obsession, apparently. And then we also had this today from CNN's Andrew Kaczynski of the K File, just a ridiculous fool. But before his MAGA conversion, Vance indicated that Biden won the 2020 election legitimately. Senator J.D. Vance's refusal to accept the legitimacy of the 2020 election at last week's vice presidential debate culminated his years-long conversion from a never-Trump critic into a MAGA supporter. When asked directly by Vice President Kamala Harris's running mate, Governor Tim Walz, if former Donald Trump lost the 2020 election to Joe Biden, Vance said, "Tim, I'm focused on the future." Walz called the Ohio Republicans' response a damning non-answer. Vance's response was a departure from what he said in the weeks after the 2020 election, when in a little-noticed interview, he indicated he believed that Trump had lost the election and accepted that Biden would be inaugurated. I really don't see any reason to think that this is going to become, violent or chaotic, Vance said, in a prediction that was disproven by the events of January 6th, 2021. Oh, yes, that ridiculous psyop actually proves that Trump supporters are very violent. It was, after all, the very violent insurrection. Vance went on, I think, people certainly feel that they need to fight and they need to see this through to the end, but I think they're supportive of the president continuing the litigation. But I also don't think, frankly, these are the sorts of people who are going to go burn up stores and set cars on fire and make life a living hell for everybody. I think that when Biden is inaugurated, people will, more or less accept it, and it'll be on to the next fight. Vance said he felt there was hypocrisy in how the Democrats never fully accepted Trump's 2016 victory, but Republicans were asked to immediately accept Biden's win. Ultimately, Vance told podcast host Megyn Kelly in an interview that aired the last week of November 2020 that Trump supporters would accept Biden's win and people would move on when he was inaugurated. Most notably, Vance never parroted Trump's stolen election rhetoric during this time, according to a K-File review of his social media activity. In fact, Vance never tweeted or liked any content related to the aftermath of the 2020 election at any time. Vance was promoting the release of the Hillbilly Elegy movie based on his best-selling book. Likes on X, formerly Twitter, are now hidden, but CNN archived a copy of Vance's before he was picked as Trump's running mate. A spokesperson for Vance declined to comment. The article runs through its obligatory restatement of all of the slogans about how election fraud never happened. It was all baseless claims, and they go on. Vance's silence during this period stands in stark contrast to Trump's aggressive efforts to overturn the election results. Vance began to change his tune when running for office, however. In July 2021, he entered the Ohio Senate Republican primary under a barrage of criticism for past anti-Trump remarks, including calling Trump reprehensible in now-deleted tweets from 2016. Vance apologized for past anti-Trump comments and soon began parroting the former president's stolen election rhetoric during the 2022 race. And to be clear, I was anti-Trump in 2016. Outspokenly anti-Trump in 2016. And then, after his victory, I realized that I had been severely misinformed by the mainstream media and spent the next few years trying to figure out why people actually went out and elected Donald Trump. And the final nail in that coffin, as I've said many times before, was watching Donald Trump's press conferences, understanding that he was telling the truth because I had already done the research, and then seeing the TV attempt to frame everything Donald Trump said in the worst possible way while pitching the maximum possible fear about COVID and every other regime agenda throughout 2020. So I totally understand how people can come around on Donald Trump. It's just very strange to do it between the rigged and stolen election of November 3rd, 2020, and when you enter into politics with Peter Thiel's backing 9 months later? Is it all a white hat op? Hey, maybe, but also maybe not. And it's kind of important to find out. In one Republican debate during that 2022 fake election cycle, he loudly declared, "I think the election was stolen from Donald Trump." Well, good. In January 2022, he attacked then Representative Adam Kinzinger, a Republican, for his belief that Trump incited the attack on the Capitol. In comments posted on X in July 2021, he criticized those who said, quote, "The 2020 election was totally legitimate," end quote. Trump's eventual endorsement of Vance in the crowded Ohio Senate primary gave the venture capitalist the credibility he needed among the former president's loyal base. The endorsement not only helped Vance overcome skepticism about his earlier Trump criticism, but also propelled him ahead of his pro-Trump competitors, making him the frontrunner for the GOP nomination and eventual winner of the general election in a state that twice backed Trump. And as a huge fan of War Room, who cannot wait for Steve Bannon to get back so I can start watching it again, I watched throughout this entire process as J.D. Vance would come on War Room and consistently develop a more pro-MAGA message. It was actually very similar to the appearances Carrie Lake made on War Room. War Room did this with a number of candidates over the last few years, including, by the way, Peter Thiel's other guy, Blake Masters. Masters couldn't get himself all the way there on the election fraud issue, and then when the 2022 midterm steal happened, most especially in Arizona, he basically just accepted defeat and disappeared. We were told he lost that race to incumbent Democrat Senator Mark Kelly, the spaceman, who was rumored to be one of the potential Kamala Harris running mate possibilities. Now again, J.D. Vance might be a good guy. He might be the best guy. All we know is what's available to us, what has been shown to us. J.D. Vance says a number of nice things in very nice ways, and all of those things align almost perfectly with the conservative establishment and its positions as they've been developed over the long term. He did not push their war agenda in Ukraine. He has encouraged restraint and voted for that restraint on a number of issues while serving in an illegitimate Senate. And when he's been asked the toughest questions, he often ducks them and changes the subject. Again, all of that could be J.D. Vance doing exactly as he's told and the exact right thing all the time. But I'm not just going to assume that, because it's in the script for a reason, and I want to know what that is. I would encourage anyone who is relatively new to the show to go back to the 2 episodes immediately following. The episodes were Dark Day from July 15th of this year and Movie Watchers from July 16th. And in that episode, I discuss some of the implications of the somewhat widely held view that what we are watching is a movie, is a show. We're being told a story to bring the collective consciousness to a certain place in order to move forward with this whole project of saving America. So I would strongly suggest giving that a listen. And there is also an episode from last year called On Kayfabe that I think will probably help in defining and understanding some of these concepts. As always, you can just go to the Substack and search by keyword using the search option. Just type in Dark Day or Movie Watchers or On Kayfabe, and you should find the episode pretty quickly. All right, so tomorrow's interactive live stream will be at 3 p.m. I will send that link out. Please feel free to leave any questions, any articles, any subjects you would like to hear discussed in the comments to that blog post from Substack that you will very likely be receiving in your email if you are a paid subscriber. And as for this podcast, I will be back on Thursday at the same reasonable time on the same reasonable podcast network. I don't have a network. Masks and lockdowns don't work. They lied to you about a pandemic. And Joe Biden will never be president.
In my mind, that's the end game.
If you're listening for free and would like to support the show, the best way to do that is by signing up for a paid subscription at imyourmoderator.substack.com. You can find the info stream over on Telegram at t.me/veryreasonable. The merch site is cancelcouture.com, and for all my other links, you can visit linktree.com/I'm your moderator. And I'll see you soon. Down on the rain.